Welcome to Beyond Civilization. My name's Mauricio, and today I'll be traveling back in time through the dark, dense forests of western Mississippi to explore a Civil War era ghost town that's been all but abandoned. This place has seen it all, including naval bombardments, epidemics, and flooding, and it was even the site of a small skirmish between Union and Confederate forces that ended up with a warship's cannonball lodged inside a church facade. Join me today as I explore the crumbling ruins of this town that seems to have been frozen in time. This is the story of Rodney, Mississippi, a desolate ghost town located about 32 miles northeast of Natchez, Mississippi. Welcome to Beyond Civilization. Today we're going to be covering the ghost town of Rodney, Mississippi. It was founded around 1774, and now it's nearly abandoned. It's only got a handful of residents left. There are still a few historical buildings left here, including a couple of churches, a Masonic lodge, and what they call the Wooden Bridge of Death, which we're going to check out as well. This is known as the First Baptist Church. Around the year 1774, General Phineas Lyman from New England led an expedition here to organize the first settlement that would gradually give way to the flourishing town that later became known as Rodney. When Mississippi was admitted as a state in 1817, the town of Rodney very nearly became the state's first capital, missing out to Old Washington, near Natchez, by only 3 votes. Nonetheless, the town continued to grow and prosper. By 1830, as transportation through the nearby Mississippi River continued to increase, Rodney had grown to a population of about 200, and the town had dozens of businesses, including the state's very first opera house. However, little could the townspeople have imagined all of the trials and ordeals that awaited them throughout the next few decades. In 1843, Rodney suffered through a severe epidemic of yellow fever. It was so devastating that the outbreak was reported in the national newspapers. Despite this setback, Rodney continued to persevere, grow, and even flourish, becoming the busiest port on the Mississippi River between New Orleans and St. Louis by the 1850s. By 1860, it boasted 4,000 residents, and its main streets downtown were lined with businesses, including banks, wagon makers, tinsmiths, barbers, doctors, dentists, general mercantile stores, hotels, saloons, and pastry shops. Like so many other southern towns, Rodney also got its fair share of Civil War action when the conflict broke out. In 1863, the Tinclad Union gunboat U.S.S. Rattler was stationed at Rodney. Though Navy Admiral David Porter had left strict orders that no one was to leave the ship, the crew was restless. When the Reverend Baker, a Northern sympathizer, invited Captain Walter Fentress and his men to attend services on September 13th of 1863, his invitation was accepted. That Sunday morning, the captain, a lieutenant, and some 18 soldiers arrived at the church, dressed in their best uniforms, and quietly seated themselves in the congregation. None were armed except Second Assistant Engineer A.M. Smith, who carried a hidden revolver. The sailors' need for release from the boredom on the ship would prove unwise. Just as the second hymn began, a Confederate cavalry commander, Lieutenant Allen, walked up to the Reverend Baker, apologized for the interruption, and announced to the congregation that the church was surrounded by rebels and demanded the surrender of the Union sailors. After a minor scuffle, 17 Federal troops were captured by the Confederates, including the gunboat's lieutenant and captain. When word of the prisoners reached the Rattler, the gunboat bombarded the town and the church, which at the time was only about 300 yards from the Mississippi River. However, when the Confederate commander, Lieutenant Allen, sent word that if the shelling did not stop, all prisoners would be hanged, the Union ceased the shelling, but not before the church and 4 homes were hit. One of the cannonballs was even embedded in the front of the church. Afterward, the crew of the Rattler became the laughingstock of the nation, for it was the first time in history that a small squad of cavalry had captured the crew of an ironclad gunboat. Some months later, Captain Fentress and his men were exchanged for captured rebel soldiers and resumed their Navy service at other posts. Though Rodney and the surrounding area were spared any major battles, the Civil War still left its mark here, as the land was stripped of food, livestock, and slaves by the Union. Reconstruction further stripped away the prosperity of Rodney, as well as much of the South. Thus, the Civil War would spell the beginning of the end for this once thriving port city. In 1869, the town was consumed almost entirely by a fire which left most of the city in a heap of charred ruins. However, this was still just the beginning of the town's misfortunes. A large sandbar had formed in the nearby Mississippi River, causing the Grand Waterway to alter its course in about 1870. With the river now 2 miles west of Rodney, the town lost its port. The Rodney Town Cemetery is located on the wooded bluff behind the Presbyterian church. Abandoned and overgrown, it not only contains the remains of locals, but also the graves of river travelers and folks from St. Joseph, Louisiana, across the river from Rodney.
Died 1842. Wow. Okay, 1946, that's the most recent I've seen here so far. It's a huge cemetery. Oh, there's a stone. Can't quite read that. Oh, the tree. There is one. There's a grave inside the tree. I think the tree must have grown on top of it. That is remarkable. How old is this? Miller.
Rodney's population declined even more when it was bypassed by the Natchez, Jackson, and Columbus Railroad that reached nearby Fayette, Mississippi. With its citizens poor, it was too late for Rodney.
And here, they just caved. I don't know how much longer it'll hold.
Today, the small town of Rodney still supports just a handful of citizens and a number of its original buildings. Some of the homes have been maintained or restored, and a few of them actually continue to be utilized as homes today. There are no remaining businesses in this small town. The Opera House, Town Hall, and other major commercial buildings have long since disappeared. More buildings remain in various stages of decay or have completely fallen to the ground and are overgrown with trees and brush. Not too far away from the cemetery in the center of the ghost town lies what's labeled on Google Maps as the Wooden Bridge Bridge of Death. I was unable to find any information at all on this bridge, but given the age of the town as well as its location deep within Confederate territory, I can only assume that it was used for lynchings in the past. However, I'll be the first to admit that this is purely speculation, and I'll allow my knowledgeable and intelligent viewers to share your thoughts on this in the comments section below. Truly, Rodney is a place with an unforgettable history, where you can take a plunge back in time to the Civil War era and even earlier, trying to piece together what life must have been like here for the residents of this once proud city. Here, you can escape the concrete jungle of civilization and let your imagination run free. As a matter of fact, whenever I spoke here, I would constantly catch myself whispering instead of talking out loud, although I couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was out of awe or respect for this place and its former residents. Or perhaps because seeing life after humans is a humbling experience. It's a reminder that we don't really own the land that surrounds us, but rather we borrow it, sometimes for what seems to be just a mere moment in the endless sands of time. Sooner or later, however, nature always reclaims it. Thank you so much for joining me on this adventure. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Beyond Civilization, if you're enjoying my content, as well as clicking on the notification bell to be notified of any future videos that I produce. I'll see you on the next one.